Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hello, everybody. I am Vanessa Anastasopoulos. I'm chair of the ICCI, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's panel discussion on retiring from independent consulting, practical, financial, and existential reflections. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, though the Q&A will not be shared as a recording. And let's see, I'm joining you today from Tiohtià:ke, which is also known as Montreal and is located on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. This land has long served as a place of meeting, exchange, and community for Indigenous peoples. So I invite you to start an exchange amongst yourselves. Post into the chat your location, as well as anything else that you would like other people to know about you, and in particular, your evaluation practice. So a little tip that I like to mention is that you can save the chat for future reference. And I think in prior sessions, this was accidentally disabled, but I do believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you can save the chat for future reference, because you never know when you're going to want to partner with someone who has a specific skill set, and saving the introductions that people post in the chat is one way to help you identify and connect with specific types of evaluation consultants as needed in the future. Our Zoom access is hosted today by the Canadian Evaluation Society, and Scott is posting instructions in the chat for how to access closed captioning and the automated French translations. ICCI has been very fortunate to have CS's support on all of our online events since September, and I want to thank CS enormously for this. Going forward, CS is no longer going to be able to provide that support for the ICCI. So our steering committee is working now on figuring out a new process, and we're aiming to make the transition as seamless as possible for the rest of you. So as I just mentioned, ICCI does have a steering committee, and I'm looking at Roman and Gail who are on it, among others. This steering committee is made up of volunteers with a shared passion for independent consulting and building a strong community among independent consultants. So we offer free activities aimed at offering learning and connection that supports you at whatever stage you're at in your independent consulting journey. So before we turn to today's panel, I'd like to briefly just highlight some of our upcoming ICCI events so that you can mark them in your calendars. No exact dates yet, but we're getting close to it. It's going to be towards the end of March. We're going to be hosting an online networking event about subcontracting, a topic that's been requested by several ICCI members. For those of you who've attended our past ICCI networking events, this one's going to have a different format. The focus is going to be on creating a space for participants to meet and explore fits for future subcontracting partnerships. So it's going to be speed networking, speed dating style, and it's going to be facilitated by Marie-Philippe Lemoine, who is a longtime CS member and volunteer who has kindly offered to facilitate this for us. ICCI also has a full slate of activities planned for CS's conference in May, which is going to be in Edmonton. If you're going, you can look forward to an ICCI-sponsored thematic breakfast, a panel presentation about independent consulting, a social gathering for ICCI members, probably, we're hoping, on the evening of May 25th, date to be confirmed. And we're working on more, but we're not sure yet if it's going to manifest, so I won't say more than that now. We'll let you know. Our AGM is also going to take place, and that's in the first week of June. So stay tuned for an announcement about our keynote speaker. We're working on getting somebody really great to share with you. And I'd like to ask you all to please start thinking about self-nominating to join ICCI Steering Committee. So there's a period at the AGM where people can do that. And honestly, we need lots more hands on deck to continue offering webinars and networking opportunities to independent consultants and consulting curious evaluators. So please think about signing up for that next year. The work for that starts, you self-nominate in June, but then it starts in September and goes through till the following June. So in addition to these upcoming events, you can also watch past recordings of ICCI webinars on our YouTube page. So I'll post a link to that in a moment, along with a link to register to receive ICCI notifications about upcoming events and a link to our brand new website. I'll put that all in the chat in a moment. And now on to our main event. Today's panel is about the realities of retiring from independent consulting, a topic worth thinking about at whatever stage you are at in your consulting journey. I still have a few good years personally before I can wind down my practice, but I see it on the horizon, and I'm very much looking forward to learning from our accomplished panelists today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel facilitator and invaluable ICCI Steering Committee member, Roman Katsnelson, to get us started.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Vanessa. And hello, everybody. My name is Roman Katsnelson. I am based in Calgary, Mohkinstsis, on Treaty 7 territory, which is the lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Arhe Nakota Nations, the Dene Tsuut'ina Nation, and of course, we're home of the Métis Nation within Alberta as well. My relationship to this land is as a land orphan, but I've lived here longer than anywhere else, and so it is home, and I'm grateful for it. I'm an evaluator and a consultant. I've been one for a little bit longer than the other, but they're kind of contemporaneous. And I'm grateful to gather here virtually with all of you. Grateful to CES and ICCI for the opportunity for all of us to gather. And grateful most of all to our panelists for letting me share the stage with you all and be a witness to your reflection and your wisdom. Our agenda is quite simple. So maybe just worth mentioning that we do have time set aside at the end for direct conversation and your questions and answers. After the panelists' reflections, we'll invite your questions in whatever format you prefer. You can post them in the chat, and then I will try to moderate those and pass them on to our panelists. Or you can ask them directly with voice by just raising your virtual hand, and then we'll be able to see you and invite you in. One thing that's lovely today is we do have panelists who are Anglophone, we do have panelists who are bilingual, and so if you have a question in French that you'd like to ask, we certainly invite you to do that, but that will please be in voice and not in chat, because that will be harder to moderate, because unfortunately I lack in this regard and don't speak French myself. So I'm trying to advance these slides, and it's sort of letting me. We're talking today about retirement, broadly speaking, but also retirement from independent consulting specifically. And Vanessa, as you mentioned, this is a journey that many of us may undergo perhaps in a few years, perhaps in a few decades. So how do we prepare? What do we consider, and what do we think about? I think that we can ask those who have navigated this journey already. In preparation for today's conversation, it kind of made me think of this quote from the Republic. It reads, "There is nothing I like better than conversing with those older than me, for I regard them as travelers who have gone a journey which I too may have to go, and of whom I ought to inquire whether the way is smooth and easy or rugged and difficult." And I love this. There's a notion here that wisdom is won through experience and then shared through reflection and dialogue. And that's what we're gathering here to do. So I'm grateful to our panelists for the gifts of your wisdom. And as you tell us about the journey that you have already traveled. And I'm going to ask you in turn to introduce yourselves, but I'm having a hard time advancing the slide. Awesome. Well, so I couldn't be more thrilled to join Sandra, Sellick, Natalie, Kishchuk, and Gail Barrington, who are our panelists. I'll pass it over to you to do a little bit of an introduction before we set up the content of the panel. So Sandra, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much, Roman, and thank you, Vanessa, for opening the session today. Much appreciated. For the past 45 years, I've lived, learned, worked, and played on the traditional ancestral lands of the Sellick people that comprise the Okanagan Nations Alliance. My home is on land presently known as Kelowna. I'm pleased to talk to you today and begin by introducing myself. I can say that I began my practice as an independent consultant in evaluation on September 1st, 2012, which was the day after I officially retired from a 35-year career in public education as a classroom teacher, principal of the school, of various schools, and district principal. I completed the requirements for designation as a credentialed evaluator 6 months after starting my practice. So that was in early 2013. It was through a graduate course in evaluation that I took in 2000, the year 2000. I had a moment of epiphany when I suddenly realized that in the context of public education, evaluation meant assessment of student performance, evaluation of teacher performance, occasionally evaluation of resources, and very sporadically evaluation of our programs. I became quite focused on the need for evaluation and focused my professional and academic learning for the next decade on program evaluation. And it was partway through that journey that I decided when I finish my career as a public educator, I would like to try my hand as an independent consultant working at arm's length, third-party role with others undertaking evaluations. I anticipated that my work would be largely with school districts and schools, but as it turned out, it was more with not-for-profit organizations and non-education focused groups, which was a surprise. As I became immersed in the world of evaluation, I joined the Canadian Evaluation Society, and that opened so many doors to mentors, inspirational role models, learning, networking, and collegiality. I served on the BC and Yukon Chapter Council as regional coordinator. I was a co-chair of the 2010 National Conference in Victoria. I was a member at large of the Chapter Council and eventually chapter rep for the CES National Board representing BC and Yukon for 3 years. During this time, I also taught at Royal Roads University summer courses in their School for Leadership in the Master of Arts in Leadership program, which allowed me to combine my passion for education with leadership. And I worked in an education evaluation component wherever possible. The idea of a I feel very honored to be part of this panel. And I will say that I retired 3 times. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I have the chance to do some reflections. But I feel very honored to be invited to be part of this panel with such distinguished colleagues as Natalie and Gail, who have been role models, people I have admired for their work as career evaluators. I would like to pass the microphone over to Natalie now.
Thank you, Sandra. I too am honored to be here with you and Gail and everybody else, and thanks to the ICCI for inviting us. I'm going to just say a few words about my practice as an independent consultant, just to give you a sense of what I'm retiring from, and for some context. I started as an independent consultant in 1996. I'm 67, almost 68 now. So that's been, 30 some years, more than that maybe. I incorporated in 1998. But before that, I worked for a total of about 10 years for government in research evaluation type roles for the federal government, and then in provincial public health. As an independent consultant over the years, my clients were quite varied, and the mix changed over time. But globally, I'd say about half the time I was working for federal departments and agencies, and the rest of the time for not-for-profits, either large organizations like some of the national health charities, or small local organizations, communities where I'm based. I was always doing multiple projects at once. This has a bearing on how one extricates oneself from consulting work. And generally on my own, unless they were bigger projects. Sometimes the projects I did were, 1 to 2 months. I'm sure everybody has a variation in their practice as well. The largest and longest ones were about 18 months. And for projects of that size, I generally teamed up with collaborators, usually other independent consultants, or sometimes with people who are working in some of the smaller firms. So practice that was concentrated in public health and sort of generally social and community development, as well as in research organizations at federal and provincial and national health charity levels. So that's a bit about where I started the retirement journey from. And I'm happy to pass the baton over to Gail.
Thanks so much. It's great to see you all here today, and we certainly appreciate your interest. And I want to thank my fellow panelists, as well as Roman and Vanessa, for organizing this session. I live in Calgary, like Roman, which is Treaty 7 territory, and I'm so grateful for this beautiful, beautiful country that we live in and share. Now, I'm a credentialed evaluator and actually was involved in the credentialing board from its inception. And while I was vice president of CES, we did an evaluation of the credentialing program, and then I chaired the committee that revised the actual various parts of the credential process. So I had my own consulting company for 35 years, Barrington Research Group, and during that time, I completed over 130 evaluation studies, mainly in health research and education. And as you'll hear more about later, I wrote the book Consulting Startup and Management, a guide for evaluators and applied researchers, in 2012. And co-authored the 2022 book with my colleague Beverly Triana Tremaine, Evaluation Time, a Practical Guide for Program Evaluation. I served on the boards of both the American Evaluation Association and the Canadian Evaluation Society, and really was so fortunate to receive some awards, including Contribution to Evaluation in Canada and the American Alva and Gunnar Myrtle Award for Evaluation Practice. I'm a fellow of the CES, and I've taught many courses in evaluation, qualitative and mixed methods. And I am now retired. I'm going to talk to you about that soon. So I'll pass it over to Roman.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. And thank you for sharing that, and thank you for setting the context both of kind of your presence and your history and your story, and then specifically kind of queuing up, as you said, the careers that you retired from. And so when we gathered together in preparation for today, we talked about the retirement journey as kind of composed of 3 stages, broadly speaking: preparing for, moving through, and living beyond retirement. And so each of the panelists will share their own reflection on the journey across these 3 stages. They're considered questions of practical considerations, navigating life circumstances, building and maintaining community ties, and professional and personal identities. So you've each prepared a reflection to share with us. Sandra, I'll pass it to you first, and Vanessa, I'll just ask you to take the slides off the screen so we can look at each other instead.
Thank you, Roman. I'd like to speak about some personal reflections on knowing when it's time to retire. A few thoughts on the unique features of retiring as an IC compared to retiring from another career. I'd like to talk about what I was prepared for and what surprised me, and a little bit about life after retirement. So, when I was a school principal, I was so fully engaged with the leadership work and so loved the setting and the impact that I felt my work was having on our community that I wondered, how would I ever be able to retire from this? What would I do? What would life be like? How could I leave this? And at the time I discussed it with a mentor, and she said, "You will know when it's time. A little voice will tell you." And I thought that sounded very esoteric. What if my little voice didn't tell me? What if I went past my best before date? What if I left too early and felt unfulfilled? But 3 times I heard that little voice. I heard the little voice when it was time to leave school administration. I heard the little voice when it was time to fold my practice as an independent consultant. And I heard the little voice when it was time to step back from my teaching for the university. Each time, my retirement was in part or in large part influenced by health reasons, not my own. As I was nearing the end of my career as a principal, I had almost 34 years, and I had planned to retire at the end of my 35th year, when I would be eligible for my pension. Several months before, as I was approaching the last 18 months, my husband had emergency eye surgery, and we realized that it was actually a miracle that he did not lose his sight. And if he had lost his sight, all of the things we planned to do in retirement would have been severely compromised. I also lost my stepfather, who was a very fit 80-year-old man. He had a fall. It went downhill very quickly, and he passed within 3 months of his fall. After those two things happened, I thought, I have an opportunity to retire now. I don't need to carry on. If I'm going to have some quality time in retirement with my husband, that I should make the move. So I gave my school district 9 months notice from January that I would retire at the end of August. And that was a very good move, because you need a lot of time to make sure that the transition is smooth if someone is coming in behind you, or if you are working as an independent consultant, to make sure that things are wrapped up and tied up. When I retired from consulting, it was because my husband was experiencing cognitive difficulties, and we could see the writing on the wall that he was going to need my support more and more. When I retired from my university teaching, it was because he had received a diagnosis of mixed form dementia. And we had an open window of how long that would last and how fast it would progress. I can tell you, you can't do independent consulting or teaching, university teaching, when you are living with and becoming the caregiver for someone with rapidly advancing dementia. In fact, to be here today, I advised Roman that I may not actually be able to be here because the days are unpredictable. For today, I needed to make arrangements for a dear friend to come, and he's gone out with my husband today for a walk and a coffee. I would not be able to be otherwise. I'm not sure if it's a unique feature to retiring from the IC work, but retiring from a board of education or a university involves someone else taking responsibility for finding your successor. The job continues with others in the role, but as an independent consultant, I closed my practice at a point in which I had completed a major contract and had not submitted any proposals for further work. My last project was to set up a framework for a post-secondary education that would continue over a period of several years. The institution wanted me to implement the evaluation, but I declined, knowing that things were not looking good on the horizon for being able to do work like that. And I recommended another evaluator, who I'm pleased to see is with us here today, Don Murray. And his company went on to complete the evaluation. I think it's important to recognize that retirement can come at any time, by choice or by fate, and that you need to anticipate the need for a plan if these kinds of scenarios come upon you unexpectedly, whether it's working closely with another independent consultant so that in the event that you have to step back from the work, there's someone else to step in, or being very mindful each time you bid or put in a proposal or bid on a contract, or engage in networking with the intention of it leading to a contract of some sort. If you have plans or family members who are an important part of your future plans, I recommend that you make the decision to retire a little earlier than you might otherwise do in order to maximize the amount of time that you have. When I look back on it now, I can't believe I've been retired for 12 and a half years from my career. I think, how did I get to this point so quickly? The time passes very quickly, and you suddenly find yourself at the stage where retirement appears. When I retired, I was prepared to have some sort of sense of identity crisis. My multiple retirements had allowed me to adopt a new identity as I went on. But there is a period that you go through where you do adjust to being a retired person. When you have to talk about your work in the past tense rather than the present tense. It was not an overwhelming situation for me, but it did something as small as going to a meeting of some kind where you meet people and not having a business card to give to identify yourself. That may sound remarkably trivial, but it's one example of a small thing where you suddenly feel, oh, I don't have something like that. So how do you relate your identity to or share it with others? One of the things that really surprised me was the number of places in which my professional email address had been logged in for associations, organizations, community groups, and it had been used as my contact, but also my login for their websites. And for a long, long time after I thought I was fully retired, I was still thinking, oh, I should change that to my personal email address if I want to continue with this organization. That surprised me. So I would recommend, as a lead up to retirement, that you keep a list somewhere of all the places where your email address has been logged in or used as a user ID, to make sure that you either bring closure to those associations before you retire, or that messages are forwarded to another email address so that you can choose which organizations you may want to stay in touch with and continue to follow in your retirement. I thought that when I took down my website that would probably be the end to it, but it wasn't. The presence we have in social media, even though I only had LinkedIn and a long time ago Twitter, it continued. On LinkedIn, I would only post things about evaluation when I was working. Since retiring, I've been able to post things, other things, but I usually filter everything I post through the lens of how is this going to look when it pops up in my network email that Sandra posted a message or she responded to someone else's message. That's caused me some conflict, inner conflict at times when there's something that I want to make a comment on, but with my LinkedIn profile being evaluation oriented, I have been reluctant to post something. So that's a thought, whether you want to set up, radically change your LinkedIn presence or your other social media presence to give yourself permission to post off topic, or whether you'd like to keep on topic. Another thing is the question of how long to keep files, documents, draft documents, and email correspondence. I must confess, I still have archived email correspondence from some of my past clients. I have no idea why I'm keeping them. I should probably let them go, but I haven't done that yet. I also have a box of files in my storage locker that I am hanging on to. I have no idea why I'm hanging on to them. I don't think anyone's going to come back and request them, or I'm going to need them for a lawsuit or something like that, but it's just a matter of letting go. So you might want to establish your practice for when do you delete files, when do you destroy files, and make that part of your current practice. Another thing I had not anticipated would be how long I would dream about either working in schools or doing evaluation. I think your subconscious is far deeper than you understand it to be. And here, years after evaluation and public education, I can find myself waking up in the morning and thinking, oh, well, I'm glad that was a dream, because I would have found myself in the dream in a position where I'm working with clients and all of a sudden I'm completely unprepared. Those kinds of things. It is very surprising how long after retiring I've been experiencing those kinds of understandings. The loss of business income was not really a problem for me or an issue, because when I started my independent practice, I had a good pension as a retired BC educator. And so my goal was not to get another full-time job. My practice was always intended to be a part-time job. And I had set a limit of under $30,000 a year so as to avoid becoming involved with charging GST. And that worked really well for me. Some years it was higher, some years it was lower. The CRA would constantly remind me of my good years by increasing my installment payments in the following year. But I actually found that the work as an independent consultant added to my income, pension income, and it put me in a higher tax bracket. So I think for most of the 13 years that I worked as an independent consultant, I really didn't clear very much because most of it just went to taxes. But I thought, I guess I'm willing to pay for the joy of working as an independent consultant because it's such a rewarding career. And then finally, I had the question, almost Shakespearean, to CES or not to CES, to CE or not to CE. And I wondered, should I bring closure to my association with the CES? Should I let my CE designation expire? And I made the decision to stay engaged. The CES offers a very reasonable rate for evaluators over the age of 60. It's pretty inconsequential. I wanted to stay in touch with a community that has meant so much to me, and a community which I have so enjoyed being part of. I wanted to follow trends and innovation in evaluation, and I'm fascinated to follow the trend of AI in evaluation right now. I wanted to be able to access current issues of the CJPE. I wanted to support the CESEF with student case comp funding. I wanted to be able to review conference proposals articles for the Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation, and serve on the editorial board for the CJPE. And I wanted to have the option of attending conferences, national and provincial, at reduced rates. When I renewed my CE designation in January, I had credits well beyond the 40 hours. So I know I'm good for another 3 years. I'll revisit in the 3 years because I suspect my professional development opportunities will be greatly reduced in the coming 3 years. And life beyond retirement, well, I have volunteered for organizations. I don't serve on any boards because I'm too unpredictable and unreliable in my ability to serve. But I do a lot of smaller things. I deliver posters for Ballet Kelowna. I sell baking at bake sales for worthy organizations. I collect poppy donations for the Legion. These are small things that I can do that make me feel part of the community. My big retirement project was going to be travel and writing. I can no longer travel, and I don't have time for writing. Being a full-time caregiver is very time-consuming. But one thing that I do like to do is critique surveys. I encounter a lot of surveys and satisfaction scales. And usually, if there is an opportunity to offer a comment on the survey at the end, I like to share my expertise in survey design by making constructive suggestions for how the surveys of multitude organizations could be improved. I'd like to turn that over to Natalie.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandra. That's so interesting, and I think we'll find some points of crossover in our respective journeys. So I'll start by talking about leading up to retirement, and I'll go through those sort of 3 phases. Leading up to retirement, that period started for me, as it turned out, the year I turned 50. I hadn't really thought about it much before then. I thought, yeah, one day I'm going to retire. Didn't make time to think about it. Didn't really consider what it was going to be like. The only thing I was doing was contributing to RSPs. But then at 50, I had a health event. Similar situation to Sandra, only this time, this was me. And it made me think, okay, there are things that I want to do with my life that I haven't even started yet. And it's going to have to be up to me to carve out the time to do that. So that's when I started seriously thinking about retirement and being able perhaps to retire maybe as soon as 60. So from that point on, I was kind of in a pre-retirement kind of thinking about it mode. By the time I did get to actually starting to retire some 10 years later, I was starting to hear those little voices that Sandra was talking about. Okay, it's time to go. It's time to go. So throughout that decade, I was I did some financial preparation, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea of having an off-ramp consulting, I think, from independent consulting is important because unlike when you retire from a job, a salaried position with an organization, it's not a date. You close the door and don't come back. It's a period, and that period can be as long or as short as you want it to. So I would say really throughout the decade of my 50s, moving into my 60s, I was gradually moving on to that off-ramp. And by the second half of that decade, I was undertaking a series of steps. Now, this is going to sound really planful, but it wasn't. This is just me looking back to say, okay, this is actually what I did. Like Sandra, stopped responding to RFPs because, you know, everybody hates proposals. Nobody enjoys not winning proposals. But that also meant then, in my case, I was on a number of standing offers with the federal government. So I decided not to renew those. And I also let my security clearance lapse. I then really stopped working with new collaborators. Opportunities would come up, but I would just say I wanted to stick with the collaborators I had at that point. And same thing with clients. Wasn't really looking for new clients, would take on new projects from organizations I hadn't worked with before if they referred by existing clients. But I had a number of long-term clients that had been going since the early 2000s, and I just kept working with those organizations. So that was sort of gradual over time. I was changing the shape of my practice to be able to get to 0 projects, because if you're doing 15 and some of them will go over multiple years and there'll be an add-on and whatever, it takes a long time to sort of wind that down. I wanted to address the question of residual value, because this is something that Roman put in the description of this. And it was a question I had too. Would there be any residual or transferable value in the company that I had created? And this sounds really pretentious, but some kind of legacy. I thought I had, my own approach to evaluation, and I wondered if that could be something that I could pass on somehow. I could sell to someone. So I did look that seriously. I hired a business consultant who, did what they do, looked at this. They have a number of indicators for this kind of thing. They do comparables and so on, to see whether or not and that would work, and what would I have to do to get my organization in shape to have it be transferred or sold in that way. The answer to that was a clear no. That was not going to happen. It just wouldn't work. And I'm happy to talk about why that is. It may not be the case for everybody, but it really wasn't something, when I learned what would be involved, that I was prepared to do. So I did sort of a transfer, kind of like Sandra was talking about, in a different way, quite deliberately. If I have any legacy, it's not been transferred to people that I had mentored or worked with, and whose approach I really appreciate and feel that it's similar to mine. In terms of the financial preparation, I'm going to be very concrete about this. How you prepare depends on a few things. First of all, what resources you'll be able to count on already, minus your consulting income. So that depends on what you did before you were a consultant and how long you did it for, i.e. the size of your pension. Along with that it depends on whether or not you have a partner or partners who also have an income or a pension, and you're going to be able to count on that as your living units resources. And to my notes, and your other responsibilities, like your housing situation, your family situation. Are your kids in school? What are the other things you have to pay for? So then once you've got that figured out, what you can count on, then you have to save up the rest. If you don't have you have no other source of pension, you have to figure out how much you're going to need for when you want to retire, for what you're going to want to do. How much do you need? Well, that depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a concert pianist, if you want to travel the world first class, that's sort of one category of resources that you might need. If you want to become a monk or a nun, that's another category. But it depends on keeping those things, keeping in mind where you want to end up. Financial advisors, I'm sure most people have them, have lots of tools and fancy equations and spreadsheets and so on, and they will go through all that stuff, say abracadabra, and they'll give you a number. You need this much. But you don't actually know if that's going to be enough until you get there. You're kind of going on faith. And personally, I think it's always good to think critically about what financial advisors are telling us, because they do have vested interests. So that was kind of the decade of moving up to my early 60s. And then I was ready to be in the second phase that we're talking about, moving into retirement. Now, the great thing about being an independent consultant is if you don't have enough money, you can always make some more. And that's what happened to me. So in the category of what Sandra talked about, unexpected things happening, I had a lot of very large unexpected expenses come up just as I was moving into this phase. And so I got to 0 projects. I did nothing as paid work for a couple of years, but then there was just a conjuncture that meant that if I wanted to keep doing the things I'm doing, I'm going to need a little more income. So I went back and got back on the on-ramp and doing a little bit of work, little projects here and there. But this time, very deliberately from a financial point of view, it's easy to find projects, and when you've been a consultant for a long time, you have lots of contacts, and you'll still have lots of opportunities, and so you can pick and choose. So I'm really taking care to look at my tax bracket and look at what the cutoffs are for benefits and things like that, just to really situate in a much more mindful way than I ever did when I was actually working full time at this. The implications of this, though, were that when I had not renewed my standing offers or my security clearance. That meant that unless I was prepared to go through that again, which I really wasn't, those opportunities weren't there. So that was a choice that I had made. It felt good to be leaving those things behind, but in retrospect, I might have just, on the off chance that some catastrophic financial event would happen, keep those doors a little bit more open. In general, I think it's a good idea, even though it's very tempting to burn some bridges, just to let everything kind of quietly die down. So this period also when I really stopped having my professional identity. I took down my website, as Sandra mentioned, those things that we have there professionally. I stopped paying professional insurance, all those things I kind of canceled. I de-incorporated, which was way more time-consuming and expensive than I thought it would be, and was another sort of nail in the coffin. I always wondered if I should actually have incorporated, and by the end I was thinking, really, this wasn't worth it. And this is a conversation for another day, because independent consultants, I've talked to many people about whether or not that's worth it. And it's at this period too that I gave up my CE designation. This had been a hugely important part of my professional identity. Like Gail, worked on the program, been vice president, been on the credentialing board all the way from the very beginning. But I knew that I wanted to do different things when I retired. And so I needed to make space for that, and I needed to learn how to do those things. In my case, it's writing. But so at this point, I was deeply into development, personal development, professional development in writing. I went back, I took a university course in, I have a certificate now in creative writing. I took a ton of workshops, retreats, and things and so on. So my development as a person didn't really have room anymore for evaluation. And I always had believed that the more important part of the credential was the maintenance aspect. So in good conscience, I decided I was leaving my CE behind. And really moving into doing as much as possible the things that I had not had time before I retired. So a little bit about living in the moment now in these existential aspects. The impetus for me starting to think about retirement was to have some time for writing, to have a lot of time for writing. And not so much then to move away from evaluation, but to move into that. But I do see it, in my cases, in continuity. I practiced evaluation from a social justice perspective, trying to make the world a better place. And I'm writing speculative fiction from a social justice perspective on some of the same themes, but happily am feeling much more comfortable being an open critic of things that I find unjust, unfair, and so on. I'm also doing a lot of volunteer work in that sort of same vein. Now, when you go from 60 to 0 in terms of how you spend your time, an independent consultant's time is just, you're yanked around by the demands of deadlines, clients, proposals, reports, payments. Everything is, you really have very little control over your time. It's one of the paradoxes of people think, consultants, you can spend time doing whatever you want, but it's not like that at all. And your daily life does change quite a bit because you don't have all these deadlines. So I did feel a need to have some structure to my time. And it's very simple. It's like 50-50. I spend 50% of my time, so mornings, on my stuff. So that's writing and some other things that are I'm personally engaged in. And the other 50% of my time volunteering. So I've upped the community volunteering. I always did a little bit, but now I'm serving on boards for a couple, had been 3 community organizations, one of whom was a client prior, whose work I really believe in. I'm doing a lot of political volunteering, not something I would recommend for independent consultants. I think it's very risky. I did it as a student, and I'm very happy to be doing that again. So every level of election, I'm out there for the leftmost candidate, whatever it is, knocking on doors and doing phone calls. Really enjoying that a lot. So it's good to have a structure, but I would also say it's been important for me to leave the door open to surprises. As it turns out, the thing that I enjoy the most about my days and my weeks and my seasons is something I hadn't expected to do. It just came up, or maybe it found me. And I'm glad I've been able to make the time for that. It's an activity that is really meaning a lot for me and very enjoyable. So, you know, it's good to have a plan. It's good to know what you're going to be about when you retire. But I think things can come up and you can give yourself the opportunity to take on the things that are totally new. And I guess the final thing that I'd say about the existential aspects of retirement has to do with the pressure to be at the top of your game. This is something that just inhabits us as independent consultants. We have to be, it's competitive. We have to be there to be able to step up for our clients and keep going. You're never really entirely sure, even by the end of my career, I couldn't say I was ever entirely sure that there were going to be more contracts coming in. Well, probably, you know, I've been doing this for 30 some years, but still you never know for sure. And so you only think you're as good as your last reputation, the reputation on your last project. So you're always having to be the best you can be at everything. And really, I was getting tired of that. I really wanted to be able to give myself the opportunity to really mess up, really not do well at something, not to be the best, not even to be very good, even at something I'd worked on. And I think we're all familiar with the Zen Buddhist principle about beginner's mind. In the beginner's mind, there's many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. How our thinking gets narrowed as we come to be expert in things. Remember your first evaluation report, how long it took, how many times you had to rewrite it, the meltdown in the middle where you said, oh God, this is awful, I have to start over. By the end, I was writing evaluation reports like in my sleep. It just sort of flowed. I didn't have a beginner's mind anymore. But I found in retirement, there's something even better than a beginner's mind. It's being an actual beginner, like starting from zero and learning something completely new. So that's been the case for me. With writing for sure, but other things that I've done, I've taken on things that I wanted to be able to allow myself to fail at. And I'll close by saying that part's working out great. I've had some really spectacular failures. It's been very enjoyable. And I'd be happy now to turn over to Gail.
Wow, thank you so much. I don't know what I can possibly say that would add to what you both said, Sandra. Your strength and your honesty are just so wonderful to hear about. And I was interested particularly in your issue about identity. I don't think I've been able to solve that one because I have to call myself something. Now I call myself a writer, and I do. I have a business card for being a writer. So, and I kept my website and added a new page for being a writer. So I'm not able to give it up completely, that's for sure. And Natalie, you're so practical, all your business sense. I certainly wish I had had it. But I never had a pension. And I am married, and we live on our RSPs and our investments, and we're thankfully comfortable. And so that's not a problem. Both of you mentioned records management, and I would heartily recommend that you start shredding your files now, because I ended up with actually a storage unit full of boxes of client files. And I had to hire a shredding truck to come up to the door to actually shred these 200-300 boxes of files. And then I had 3 filing cabinets. I've just got one here now, and had those to go through. And I'm still having trouble getting rid of some of it because it's so close to my heart. So I would say that was an unanticipated problem, and I certainly recommend setting up some kind of routine shredding. Anyway, thank you so much. And I guess my comments are going to be a little more existential. Start off by saying I'm 80 years old, so I've been around a long time, and I had my consulting business for 35 years. And I started winding it down about 10 years before it was over, and started attending writing groups, going to writing retreats like Natalie, very interested in becoming a creative writer, which I had been when I was a child and a young adult, but then had, of course, focused on business writing and kind of trying to narrow my imagination, limit my thoughts to reality, when it's really much more fun to let your mind flow free. So now I've written a collection of 13 short stories. 3 of them have actually been published, and I've written some poetry. Again, 3 poems have been published. I've written a serial story, which is available on my website, gailbarrington.ca / creative writing. And so it's been a really fun adventure writing this collection about a young would-be movie starlet. And now I'm working on the second draft of a mystery novel. So the writing has taken a big part of my life, and I am enjoying it tremendously. I'm having such a good time. Anyway, so that's just for background, but I wanted to congratulate you all for taking this workshop in the first place, because it means you're thinking about retirement, and that is part of the battle. You're not going to be part of the 89% of workers who don't know what money they're going to need when they retire, or the 55% of workers who don't have a retirement plan at all. This is the CPP 2025 survey. And even though we spend a quarter of our life, that's 25% of our life, in retirement, only 40% have a concrete lifestyle plan and have thought about things like social and community support and meaningful activities and healthy daily routines and appropriate living arrangements. So I have to ask myself, why is this the case? Is this magical thinking? What is the matter with us? If we don't look that way, maybe we won't notice that retirement is cropping up, or that maybe it's never going to happen to us, or maybe we'll work it out when we get there. Believe me, these are not good strategies. And I would say the fact that you're here and thinking about this now is certainly a great start. And I think that consultants have some critical advantages. The first one is that consulting is always risky, as Natalie has said. Excuse me. And so it's important to have an escape hatch or a plan B. And I think that that's something that I really always had. Because when I started out in the 1960s and my mother wanted me to go to teacher's college. I did not want to be a teacher. And yet at the same time, she said that it would be good to have something to fall back on. And so I did. And in fact, it turned out to be a good idea. Maybe not the way that she had planned, but certainly the idea of having a plan B is a concept that stuck with me. And as it turned out, I've kept a teaching gig really through most of my consulting career on the side, one course at a time. I taught evaluation and program planning for Athabasca University for 14 years. And then I taught program evaluation at the University of Alberta. Well, I should tell you how these things happen, because it's part of the whole coincidental aspect of our lives. How I got the teaching job at Athabasca was that I went to a public health conference, and they had booths there, and I went up to talk to a woman from the Athabasca University just to say hello, because I used to teach at Grant MacEwan College in Edmonton, which was post-secondary. Turns out that I knew her, and turns out she needed someone to teach program planning and evaluation in their master's program in health studies. And so it was as simple as that. And then I taught for 3 different cohorts over a period of 6 years for the University of Alberta. And that was through an actual client for whom I had done an evaluation of that very program. And then I taught at Michigan State University for 9 years, and this was in qualitative and mixed methods. And I got that teaching gig because of my American colleague who recommended me to another American colleague who was starting up a new program in program evaluation. And she attended one of my workshops and thought that I seemed to know quite a bit about qualitative research, and so hired me. In fact, I didn't know that much. And so I spent the first year in a complete panic studying qualitative research and mixed methods in great detail. And happily, of course, learned a lot along the way. So, but it wasn't just that I was lucky or met the right people. I also had the right skills. And that's the point I think that I'm trying to make for you. I'm not suggesting you go back to university or anything like that, but think about what your core skills actually are and how they're useful in a multitude of different situations. So having a plan B is a good idea. The second advantage that we consultants have is that we're project oriented. And so we tackle a problem, we figure it out, we collect evidence, we draw conclusions, solve the problem. Instead of the never-ending story of most careers, ours is episodic. And so as a result, we're able to pivot quickly for the next challenge. And it's usually totally different from the one before. So in fact, we love change. So this is a good thing. And it makes us flexible and resilient, which are useful characteristics for retired people. And our third advantage is that we're goal-oriented. Having clear objectives for an evaluation study is not that different from having clear objectives for life. So looking back, I can see that my life has been a rope of many strands, and consulting was only one of them. Other strands included my family, my teaching, my professional life at CES and AEA, my volunteer life. I was president of the YWCA and on that board for 7 years, and other boards later, and also my writing. So those are like strands that make up the rope that is my life. And over time, they've braided together into a strong and purposeful life, I would say. And what I find is so interesting is that the strands not only intersect, but they interact with each other and influence each other, thus strengthening the whole. So, for example, my consulting career led to friendships and teaching opportunities. Running a business taught me leadership, project management, critical thinking, report writing. I've used all of those things in other parts of my life. The many professional colleagues I met and love not only became friends, but also led to publication opportunities and teaching gigs. Both of the books that I wrote were through knowing somebody and somehow making a connection. My ongoing passion for writing led to journaling and reflective practice. And that led to the webinars and workshops, which led to the book on consulting skills that I eventually wrote. And throughout all these different activities, of course, the support of my family has been steady, upholding me and my belief that I was doing the right thing. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's the interconnectedness of all the strands in your life that strengthen and will sustain you and nurture you in retirement. So then you might ask the question, so how am I going to braid a strong rope? And I would say, try to identify those hidden skills that you have, the ones that you've kind of put aside, the talents that you're not using, the dreams that you have but don't dare to think about. What do you really like to do? What interests you the most? What aspects of your work make you really happy? There have been skills and talents that probably are dormant that you've put off for later. Maybe you volunteered, maybe there were things about that you really liked. What kind of people would you associate with if you had the time? What have you learned through your kids' activities? It's interesting to see how parents have actually learned things like e.g. coaching, for example, working with their kids in various activities. What people and places do you want to see but you haven't had time for? Particularly with elders, as both Sandra and Natalie have mentioned, those with illnesses or debilitating conditions, don't put off seeing them. Try to incorporate them in your life now. But you're already overloaded. I know you're going to say that. You have too much to do and you're too busy. I mean, when people say, how are you? What's your answer? Oh, I'm busy. So busy equals good in your mind. And I wonder if you should perhaps rethink that a little bit and prioritize what's going on in your life. What are the strands in your life? Which ones need to be promoted and built up and planned for and improved and nurtured as you go along? Make more space for them. Create a mindset that includes them as well as work. So my advice is say yes. When things are offered to you, you might say, oh, I'm too busy, I can't. Say yes, and then work it out, because those are some of the things that you will find later will become a larger part of your life. Make it work. By broadening your options, you're building new strands in your rope of life, creating a broader sense of purpose and setting the stage for retirement, which most likely will happen slowly and over a long period of time anyway. It doesn't happen all at once. Build community in your areas of interest. Make some new friends. Take courses. Ensure that your daily routines are healthy, that you work out, walk, have coffee with people, have time to journal, track your progress, and take it from there. If you see your life as a complex, interconnected whole, it doesn't stop when you retire. It just keeps going in new and interesting directions, especially if you've planned for it and allowed for it to move into part of your life earlier. Your rope of life will bind your accomplishments into something worthwhile as you use the lessons you've learned to do what you've always dreamed of doing. Thanks.
Wow. Wow, thank you so much, all three of you, for really powerful sharing. I know I've got like 3 pages of notes and probably a lifetime's worth of thinking and letting these ideas and reflections settle and create guidance in my own self. So I'm very, very grateful. Lots of hearts coming up on the screen, lots of gratitude. I'd love to turn it over to our audience for your questions and conversation with the panel. What would you like to hear? What would you like to ask?